Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate so many amazing people across the state of Mississippi. Hey, listen, I had a terrific conversation with Jonathan Allen yesterday from J. Allen Automotive. We talked about the challenges that happen in the automotive industry when America doesn't have a realistic energy policy. And of course, I've had numerous conversations about that over time, but the residual effect or the sort of snowballing effect that happens in just about every industry when there's not a coherent, realistic energy policy in America, is pretty significant. So if you missed the conversation with Jonathan, I really encourage you to go take a listen. At the beginning of the show, though, I shared something that I shared on my outdoor show on Monday, which is, and for those of you who heard it, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but one of the things that I said was that we are in a position too often in our lives when the things that are closest to us, the things that are closest to where we live, we have a tendency to kind of take those things for granted. And, I was encouraging people to, when you're driving down the beach, consciously think about what it is you're looking at. This beautiful site south, one of the few unencumbered sites south in America that's lined by live oaks. In fact, I've been told there's one other highway like this in South Carolina somewhere where it's this beautiful drive with these beautiful live oaks that have survived so many storms. In fact, Jonathan, I talked about the resiliency of live oaks is absolutely fascinating. But we tend to take it for granted. We tend to not appreciate where we live. Now, look, when you think about it, obviously it doesn't take you long to realize that we live in paradise, and that I would say 99.9999% of us would not choose to live anywhere else. We like to visit other places, but man, we can't wait to come home again. And one of the beauties of having a place up in the Mississippi Delta, and I get a chance to visit there a lot. I talk about it a lot on the show, but I love the Mississippi Delta. It's so different than here. I've gotten close to so many people there of all walks of life. But it's a great reminder for me, especially as I do this show, that in every corner of this state, there's something to be learned, there's something to be appreciated, and or there's something to appreciate. Let me put it that way. And I love that. I love that this show has an opportunity to sort of, bring that into focus from time to time. Man, we're lucky to live in this state. And if you love the outdoors, incidentally, as I often say on my outdoor show, we live in the capital of the outdoors because some of the best hunting and fishing and outdoor life, whether you enjoy canoeing or whatever it might be, some of the best of that is available here in Mississippi, and in some respects, the best aspects of some of those dimensions are here in Mississippi, and a lot of it what the coast has to offer. Of course, I love the fish, so I spent a lot of time offshore and in the backwaters of coastal Mississippi, and it's some of the best in the world. I mean, and I'm not overstating that. That's how special it is, and so. We should open our eyes from time to time and go sit on the beach, look south, and let it cleanse your soul. I said on my show, it's like going to church, and that is for sure. But somebody who has a feel for that, somebody who I've enjoyed, we've had him on the show before. His father's been on the show numerous times, but is Robert Skrmetta. He's a commissioner with coastal Mississippi, but he has the opportunity because he's a bank examiner to travel the state, and he's also a great photographer. So when you combine all those elements together, he spends a lot of time, in his travels across the state, kind of taking it in and appreciating it, and making sure that he doesn't lose appreciation for what this state has to offer. And I thought we'd have him back and just chat about, how's it going on coastal Mississippi tourism. We'll remind you about his family legacy business here in coastal Mississippi, and then about his travels across the state. There's a lot to learn from what Robert is doing. But anyway, without any further ado, let me welcome Robert back to the show. How you doing, Robert?
You.
Good to see you.
Me back on the show. Great to be here.
Yeah. So where are you sitting right now?
The Department of Banking and Consumer Finance headquarters here in Jackson, Mississippi. This is one of our examiner offices.
So what do you do in your day job?
oversight for all state chartered banks and financial institutions in the state of Mississippi. And Mississippi, believe it or not, is number 13 in the nation of state chartered assets. And you don't hear about us being at the top of a lot of lists, but we have a really strong banking economy. And I think a large part of that is due to our agricultural wealth, and then also natural resources, be it seafood. And really just the agricultural wealth has generated a significant amount of capital for this state. And it's just been a power source for us.
Yeah, I have been fortunate to get to know a major farming family. They farm tens of thousands of acres in the Mississippi Delta, and they also have a tremendous footprint over in Yuma, Arizona, of all places. That's where they originated from. And then the patriarch of the family, who recently passed away, made the decision to buy some land and also farm in Mississippi because he saw, first of all, fertile soil. But one of the things they were experiencing in Arizona was a lack of the water resources was something that was a big issue. He foresaw that was going to be a major issue. So he wanted to have a significant footprint here. And his son at the time, Dwight Dunn, came here and raised his family here. And they farm here. And getting to know them and the risks that these farming families take and the amount of money that's generated and the amount of costs associated with it. Man, we're lucky to have farming a very significant farming community in Mississippi, aren't we?
And it's, you can't just jump into a 1,000-acre farm and be profitable. You have to have a lot of careful, strategic decisions that are made every day. And it's these farm families that they have multi-generational expertise, and we just wouldn't be successful without that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the Delta we don't see it a lot because there's no real interstate going through there, but it should not be overlooked how important the Mississippi Delta is. I think it's like $4 billion in revenue that's just getting churned over in the Delta annually. That may be underestimated, but it's a factory for agriculture. Unlike
hey, listen. Actually, we'll come back to it and at some point in the conversation, because you get a chance to spend time there. You do a lot of photography there. Some of your drone footage is awesome. And maybe at some point we can post some of that on the website so people can have an opportunity to appreciate what it is you're capturing. But it's good stuff. But let's take a step back for a second. I want to remind people where you came from. If they missed our last conversation, I think it's really important, this multi-generational business that you've been involved in.
Has the Ship Island excursion boats. My dad's still running it, daily operations. And I find myself there just about every weekend in the summer, either helping out or just being present. Or they're out there on my private boat hanging out. So one way or another, I'm spending a lot of time around that island, and more so in the last couple of years. We recently lost my grandfather. And so there's some questions of succession that are coming up that have never really been raised before, but they've always been in the back of our minds. So the future for Ship Island Excursions is we still have our strong family core employees that are keeping it together for now. But 10 years from now, we've got to come up with a plan to keep it going.
Yeah, it's a great story though, and what you guys have done to build a business. And I've enjoyed talking with your dad and really understanding that history, that family history so well. Your grandfather recently passed away, and what a legacy he leaves behind. But the reality is that you have maintained over all these years one of the most important tourism attractions that we have, haven't you?
I saw, I forget which poll it was, but the Gulf Islands National Seashore, which is Ship Island, Horn Island, and Cat Island, and Petty Boy, was the most visited site in Mississippi. So all the states of the United States had their destinations listed. Disney World was obviously Florida, Disneyland for California, Jackson Square for Louisiana, Ship Island for Mississippi. And, a lot of people still don't even know we have it, even in our hometown of Gulfport. So we could do a better job advertising it and promoting it. I think one thing we could do is put a national park visitor center right next to the aquarium. I mean, we got the library, it's the CTA facility currently, but it would be a perfect space for the national park to kind of display their treasures. And they've got one in Ocean Springs, which is really cool. And it's a perfect complement to an aquarium. And it would create a visitor center, create some more foot traffic. There's a lot of benefits to having a national park visitor center in your downtown.
Listen,
politically.
Yeah, no, I think actually that's a really good idea. When we rebuilt the Ship Island Lighthouse back before Katrina, I worked with George Slogel to do that. And you and I have not discussed this before, but I was the first chairman of the Friends of the Gulf Islands National Seashore 501(c) that we formed as a result of the effort to rebuild the Ship Island Lighthouse. So we worked really hard on that. And as I came to appreciate this chain of islands and what they meant, to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Hey, let's do this. We're at the end of the segment, Robert. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue the conversation. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We have Robert Skrmetta with us today. He's actually a commissioner for Coastal Mississippi Tourism. He's a bank examiner in his daily life, which takes him all over the state of Mississippi. And we'll get into some of his observations and his photography as we get into a little bit deeper conversation. But when we went to break, we were talking about the generational family business that he has been involved in. His family's been involved in. His father Lewis has been on my show more than once. And you think about the Ship Island Ferry, and how far back that goes. I can remember as a kid going on the boats. And then as time goes on, you guys invested in more and better equipment. And it's something it's another thing we take for granted. But the work your family has had to do over the years after storms, during storms, and all, oh my goodness, man, it has taken massive resiliency.
It has some gruesome aspects to that business, just dealing with. There's a lot of things you got to deal with, but hurricanes are always in our back of our mind. And Ship Island, what a cool little resource we have for our tourism industry. And you don't realize this, but the snack bar on Ship Island is actually Mississippi's southernmost bar and restaurant.
Wow.
So, I think that's something worth visiting if you're on a boat, or if you're interested in islands. And in fact, Jimmy Buffett, if you have his book Tales from Margaritaville, one of the first in the first pages you open up to, it says he's often asked where Margaritaville is, and it's south of Ship Island and west of Tortuga. So he even mentioned Ship Island when he describes the real Margaritaville, which is, I think that's important for Mississippians. So,
well, it helps to have somebody, God rest his soul, someone in Jimmy Buffett who had that Mississippi connection, and very, very special. But one of the things I noticed that if you take the ferry to the island and then walk across the island to the surf side, that the amount of activity on the surf side over the years has really grown dramatically. The number of chairs and umbrellas. I was there recently, actually. I was there a few weeks ago, and we did some speck fishing on the south side of the island. It was a beautiful day without a lot of waves, and we used live shrimp, and man, we were catching fish on just about every catch. But I hadn't, I spent a lot of time at Horn Island and a lot of time offshore, but I hadn't been to the island and really studied it. I passed it a couple of times, but I got up close and personal since Camille Cut was filled in. And it just, it's interesting. The island changes from year to year, whether we like it or not. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. But in your lifetime, you have seen massive change, haven't you?
Living shoreline. That's the only way to describe it. And about 3 months ago, we had almost no beach. It's one of those storm systems that came through, washed out all the umbrella poles. We had to use a metal detector to find them. I went out there last weekend, and there's now 3 feet of sand on top of where there was no sand. And in fact, the sand came in so quick that it buried. It looks like Pompeii. It buried our chairs and umbrellas. Still stayed. Didn't knock anything over. It just dumped. It's wild. I've never seen anything like it. So it's a bizarre geological phenomenon going on. I don't know how to describe it. That sand is a bear to deal with. But there, storm after storm, that South Beach still soldiers on, and there's always some umbrellas and chairs to be had over there, and some shade, most importantly.
It's also the sand is beautiful. Think about it, all the barrier islands, starting from Pensacola Beach to coming over to Dauphin Island, and then to Petty Boyce and to Horn Island, and then eventually to Ship Island. It's beautiful sand. Some of the most beautiful sand in the United States.
White quartz sand. You go to Destin, you don't realize it, but Ship Island and Destin are the same exact beach. They're just about 200 miles separated, east of each other. But go down our front beach on Highway 90. That's more like the bank of the Mississippi Sound, kind of like Mobile Bay. And it's a cool beach. Don't get me wrong. It's beautiful too. But Ship Island is our real beach. And I've spent so much time explaining to people throughout Mississippi, our front beach is not our real beach. We don't go swimming in our front beach. We go out to Ship Island to do our swimming and our boating and our beach going. So I think so Ship Island is effectively the gateway to the Barrier Islands portion of Gulf Islands National Seashore. So further reason to have a visitor center in downtown Gulfport. We've been there.
No, I agree with that. Hey, listen, you go back into history when these tall ships used to come inside Ship Island and anchor in that deep water, that very special deep water protection that they had there. And then to develop. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's just wild to think. I mean, they say the first Mardi Gras was actually celebrated off Ship Island because that's the anchorage between Mobile and New Orleans. So that's where the French were, and it would make sense.
Yeah, it would definitely make sense. And then, of course, the development of Fort Massachusetts along the way.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How many times have you told that history?
Oh gosh, it's fat. I never get tired of explaining so Fort Massachusetts was one of the last third system forts to be built. So it's also the smallest, but it's a very powerfully built fort, and it has all these really cool modern features that would just been state of the art for 50s, and just the whole reason that the fort was built is really fast. And Jefferson Davis was Secretary of War, I think, at the time when 1812 came around. He promoted having that fort built, and just it's just really neat. A really rich history of those sides. So when the British came, just imagine this: 60 tall ships, British warships, anchored off Ship Island, preparing to invade New Orleans. Fortunately, Andrew Jackson had his army there and was able to stave them off. But had he not, it might have been a different country altogether. And in fact, so like the coastal Mississippi, really from the Mississippi River, Mississippi River to the Florida state line was British West Florida. So all those Louisiana parishes are called the Florida parishes. It's really interesting, and it just I don't know. You could go down the rabbit hole for days talking about.
Well, listen, Stan Tyner, who was the former editor of the Sun Herald, used to refer to that area from the Panhandle of Florida over to New Orleans as Gulflandia. I thought he always made a really good point that we actually had more in common. Each of us had more in common with each other than each of us had with the rest of our states. And it's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I would say back in the day, they sort of understood that, didn't they?
They did. And I've heard it described as the 14th colony, like that old English, because there's a lot of just British loyalists during the Revolution that were on the Gulf Coast. And there's a lot of commerce down here just because of our ports. And that commerce continues today with our, Port of Gulfport, Port of Pascagoula, Port Bienville, on up the river, Port of Greenville, Rosedale, Vicksburg, Memphis. It's just a fascinating history.
It really is. Just coming back to the architecture of the fort on Ship Island, first of all, they made it round, and that made it able to sort of withstand tremendous hurricane waves. And, obviously Betsy and Camille, Katrina. I mean, you consider the onslaught that fort had to deal with for Katrina, and it didn't budge. That is quite a statement for what they understood about architecture and engineering back in the day, isn't it?
So that's a French design fort, and there's a whole history of just the guy that designed that fort. I believe his name was Toddle, some French guy. Anyway, they're all engineers, but he designed that fort, and you can just tell it's just it's so elegant and beautiful and simple. And you go in and you see the arches and the brickwork. It's like, what? Why can't we get these guys to build some buildings in Gulfport, get rid of some of these strip malls and put up some brick buildings?
Yeah.
And it lets you know that it can be done, and it was done that way at one point. So why don't we build stuff a little bit more permanent anymore?
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see for generations to come how the Ship Island ferry business, sort of maintains its connection. Maybe one day you'll run it. You don't think you're going to do that, but maybe one day you will.
It's not off the table. It's just it's not really an option yet for me financially, but we'll see. It may become available, and I'd love to have that asset on my balance sheet if it was ever possible to get it there.
Yeah, I know y'all will cross that bridge, at some point in the future. But hey, listen, it's really interesting as you and I, we stay in touch on social media, and you're sending me, you'll send me photos that you take or drone footage that you take. But
talk for yourself, Ricky.
Say it again.
You're quite a good photographer yourself.
I enjoy capturing what I see when I'm doing what I do. But what's interesting to me is that when you travel the state and understand the diversity of the topography, and I think I can't help but think of when I have various people on the show, and we talk about the relationship that Mississippians have with our landscape. You get a chance to see that landscape up front and personal, don't you? In fact, we're coming to the end of this segment. I think that's a good place to pick it up when we get back on the other side as we continue our conversation with Robert Skrmetta. He's a commissioner for Coastal Mississippi Tourism. We'll talk about that, by the way, how they're doing these days. My read on it is they're doing pretty good. But anyway, we'll continue our conversation with Robert when we get back on the other side. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. We're visited today by my friend Robert Skrmetta, who's a commissioner for Coastal Mississippi Tourism, but he's a bank examiner. And through his job as a bank examiner, he gets the opportunity to travel all over the state of Mississippi and develop a real appreciation for how Coastal Mississippi fits into the bigger picture. And that's really important, and it's good to visit. He's also a photographer. Hey, we'll talk a little bit about his travels across the state here in just a second. But the last time we talked, you had actually just joined Coastal Mississippi Tourism, and but you guys are hitting on a lot of cylinders these days, aren't you?
We are. Judy Young, who's the executive director, we're really lucky to have her. She is just a professional, and she's staffed that organization with some really sharp people, and they're pretty well funded, but they could always use more funding, but they do a really good job with what they have, and it always impresses me when I go in that office. They've got just great communication skills. They pick up the phone. They're very responsive. And they really like working with the small business. They've been great to work with as a small business owner. I'm not currently owner of Ship Island, but I assist my dad with some of that advertising stuff. They've been just real easy to work with, and they have an interest in promoting it because they realize how important Ship Island is to the Gulf Coast tourism. It's doing good. They do a good job promoting the casinos in our Front Beach. I think we could do a better job promoting Ship Island as more of a jewel in the crown of the kind of the natural resources part of our tourism spectrum. We have the casinos and some great restaurants, but as far as outdoor stuff to go, you kind of have to have a private boat to enjoy the islands currently if you're not from here. But Ship Island offers you people from out of town to get out to the island and enjoy a real Gulf of Mexico beach with clear water. And right now, I was out there last weekend. It's unbelievable how healthy that water, just brimming with sea life. The eagle rays and the mullet. You can smell schools of fish swimming around when you're out there. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, just coming back to Judy though. Judy came in at a time when the commission was going through sort of an unsettling time, and it was a challenge, and I brought a lot of attention to it on this show. And Judy and I have had many conversations. She's visited with me on my show. Greg Cronin, who at the time was the chairman, I think did a masterful job of helping transition the organization. And today the fact that you don't hear a lot of noise is always a good thing because when there's noise, that means that something's out of kilter. And when it's out of kilter, incidentally, we're not focused on the things we need to be focused on. And I think instead of being internally focused, the commission is now externally focused in the way that it needs to. And Judy seems to understand that. Judy seems to be sort of the perfect transformational leader at a time when we needed that. And again, I can't give Greg Cronin enough credit for the way he worked with Judy and the commission to help turn that corner.
Speaking of Greg, I love Greg. I knew him before the commission as a banker. And so Greg deserves credit for opening the last bank that opened in Mississippi. That was Charter Bank back in, I want to say 2012 or 11. But since he opened that bank, there hasn't been a new bank opened in Mississippi. And it's like, we got to get some, and that's a trend nationwide. I don't think that's, unique to Mississippi, but he would be a great person to talk to just about banking stuff and just kind of some of the regulatory burden that our industry is dealing with.
Yeah, he and I have stayed in touch, and as you know, I mean, Citizens Bank
Philadelphia
is the sponsor, the title sponsor of this show now.
Right, and that's a great bank too.
I'm just thrilled to have them as part of the show. Excuse me, but anyway, so in your travels though, you get a chance to visit every step of the way. Aspects of Mississippi that are special. In fact, you commented. I had this great show with Joe Max Higgins, and if you missed it, not you because you didn't miss it, Robert. But I'm saying to our listeners, if you missed it, you should go to your favorite podcast or go to YouTube or Facebook and listen to it. It was just a great conversation. We talked a lot about what he does, but we also remind people that coast of Mississippi is an 800-pound gorilla. If we were to really seize it the way we need to seize it, John Harrison and I had a long conversation about what's the next big thing that's going to transform coastal Mississippi. And we have to be focused on that as a set of communities here in coastal Mississippi. But we also got very specific about if Joe Max Higgins, who's one of the top economic developers in Mississippi and certainly someone that is well respected across the nation. In fact, there's been 60-minute shows about him, and he does an annual visit to Harvard to do a case study. He's a really, really sharp guy, and he's a really easy guy to underestimate, and you should do so at your own demise. But he and I had a long talk about the Mississippi Delta and what it would take to get Mississippi Delta to be successful. It was a really good conversation. But you noted the conversation as well, Robert. What's happening in the Golden Triangle, man, is undeniable, isn't it?
Had the opportunity to stay in Starkville for about 4 weeks this summer, and every evening I'd take my truck out and I'd drive out to near Brooksville. That's the Black Belt part of the state, a very old agricultural area, and it even predates the Delta in a lot of ways. But it's its own little place as well. It's just unique. Everything is down there, and they have the terraced catfish ponds, and of course the economic development going on there. The aluminum smelting plant that just went in next to the massive steel plant. They've got tremendous rail and water access with the Tin Tom. The economic impact of that. I never really spend time in that area, but it's amazing what's going on right now. And I guess Joe Max deserves a lot of that credit, and they're certainly punching above their weight. And they've got an airport with a direct flight to Atlanta that just people say is a really easy way to get around the country. And they're doing a lot of things really smart in that region. Well,
what they've done, Joe Max went to a conference along the way, as you heard us discuss, and he learned about mega sites. And a bell went off in his head because up to this point, he had done not relatively small economic development projects, not unimportant, but not on the scale that they're doing it today. He said, used to, $1 billion seemed like a big investment, but he said it's not even $1 billion doesn't do it anymore. It's multi-billions of dollars. And what they've done with mega sites, one after another, and then they're doing this most recent one. He says it's going to be the best yet. I think he said that over $50 million they're investing in this mega site that is sort of a bet on the come for some large and maybe multiple large companies coming in and taking advantage of this mega site. It's just undeniable what they've done. And the other thing that he pointed out that I thought was really interesting is that not once had they had any conversations about available talent, that, essentially build it and they will come. They don't talk about people's drug issues being in the way of them being able to be hired. It just doesn't come up because the kind of jobs that they're creating, 70, 80, 90, 100,000 plus jobs annually in terms of pay, people are flocking to these opportunities. So it's pretty amazing.
Factory right there that'll produce these employees at Mississippi State. That's just, come on. That's a great university right there. And then up the road, if you want to be a lawyer, you can go go to Ole Miss and go work in the boardroom for some of these factories. And these companies that are coming to Mississippi are massive organizations. German, they're out of Germany. The sister factory was out in Germany, I know, for this recent site you're talking about.
Okayama from Japan,
Yokohama. When I was traveling in Tupelo at one point, when they were building the Toyota plant, they had seaweed and rice at the Holiday or at the Hampton Inn breakfast bar just to cater to the Japanese community that was traveling through there to build this factory. And Mississippi has always been just a factory, whether it was for agriculture or now industry. We've always just kind of been a factory for. And we produced cotton, and now we're producing steel and aluminum, and we got the shipbuilding on the Gulf Coast. I don't know if you realize this, Pascagoula, that shipyard in Pascagoula, Ingalls Shipyard, is the biggest employer in Mobile County.
Yeah.
Okay. You go down to these places, and it looks a little rough. It's an industrial area, but everybody's working, everybody's making money, good money, and they're thriving. And whoever's calling the shots with Mississippi Economic Development, they're doing a great job, and I want to give Governor Tate Reeves some of that credit.
I give Tate a lot of credit because one of the things that Joe Max and I talked about was Haley Barber did a really, really good job of bringing attention to the need to do this, and as a result, when you look at some of the micro numbers across coast around Mississippi, what you see is improvements were happening. Then in the first term of Phil Bryant, you saw continuation of that. Second term, maybe not so much. And then, of course, Tate Reeves comes in, makes this a major goal. And now his numbers are actually surpassing Governor Reeves. So it's clear that his legacy will be economic development. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Robert Skrmetta. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Robert Skrmetta joining me today. He's a commissioner with Coastal Mississippi Tourism. He's from Coastal Mississippi, obviously. His family, the Skrmetta family, has a long legacy of the Ship Island ferry business here in Coastal Mississippi, but he's also a bank examiner, and he's coming to us from Jackson today. And that job as a bank examiner takes him all over the state. And so it's just kind of interesting to touch base with him based on his travels and what he sees when he's traveling around the state of Mississippi. Hey, listen, you spend a lot of time in the Delta. What ultimately brings you there? Is it just going to various banks across the Delta?
Right. And because of all that agricultural wealth in the Delta, there's probably 10 banks off the top of my head just in that region, economically depressed region with great banks. So we spend a lot of time in the Delta as bank examiners, and as a photographer, it's kind of the perfect job because about 4:30 I'm leaving the bank, and it's about time to go, exercise a little bit and then go get in the truck and crack a beer and take some photos of some of these Delta farmland, these row crops and the rivers out there in Rosedale. So every morning this past summer, I would wake up, usually drive to Rosedale and take some pictures of just the tugboats and stuff that were passing by. And then in the afternoon, I'd get in my truck and drive up to either the wind farm up in Dundee, or I drove up to Sumner one day, drove out to Glendora, drove out to Tutwiler. And it's like being on a boat, to be honest with you. You're just cruising through these fields, and it's just a really underrated experience. And what's
interesting? I say this about Mississippi we certainly referred to it as it relates to Ship Island, that from season to season, the island can be so different. And if you think about from season to season, what part of the state is most dynamic and most changing and most diverse? And it's the Mississippi Delta. Because you be there during the growth season and everything is green and they're in the process of harvesting now, and you got dust in the air, and which is good for the farmers. It means they haven't had rain and they've been able to harvest. And then you get to the winter and sort of the desolate nature of winter, but then wildlife come alive during that time of the year. I mean, it's crazy how diverse it is, isn't it?
And I've been fortunate this past year to spend pretty much the whole year. I was there when they harvested last season. I was there when the fields were bare all winter. I was there when they planted this season. Now I'm getting to watch the harvest go on currently with corn, and that soybean and rice will be next, and then cotton. But it's just been fascinating. And you're right. It's just this dramatic beauty. I'm not the first photographer to turn my lens on the Mississippi Delta, no question. But it's just, you get out there and you can't help but just be amazed and want to start taking I get into a different zone when I take my camera out and I'm just sitting there taking photographs of some field. I don't even know what's going on around me, but and you'll find yourself in some pretty sketchy area. I'll be walking down some of these Delta alleys, just looking at old buildings. You got to look up and realize where you are for a second. But usually these places they're fine. They're safe. They're just economically depressed. And it's been fun. And
that's been my experience too. To be, historically wondered about how welcome I would be in some of the poorer areas. And what I've learned is that we're incredibly welcomed in. I mean, I think about places in Shula, for example, that, places we eat, and Big Daddy, and going by to visit him and get some of his incredible cooking. Totally welcomed in, and just part of the family. I love that.
These gas stations in the Delta, and a lot of them are run. So the one in Rosedale is a grocery store owned by a Chinese. It might be one of the last Chinese grocery stores still in existence in Mississippi. But you go in there and they're speaking Chinese. The people, it's just so cool, and they're making Chinese food in the back of the room. But you go to another one down the street that's owned by some guy from Yemen who's selling Hunt's Brothers Pizza, but he's also got T-shirts and all kinds of tobacco products for sale. It's just interesting. And these gas stations in the Delta are they're like the backbone of some of these communities.
No, it is. Yeah. Listen, when you look at hunger in the state of Mississippi, and you think about how many people have a difficult time finding healthy meals, a lot of people in Mississippi, over 51% of the people in Mississippi live in rural areas. And you think about the entire Mississippi Delta, I would say 90% plus live in rural areas of the Mississippi Delta. There are a few exceptions, but and a lot of them, the only place they can get food is at these places. That's why you see some of the best fried chicken you've ever eaten and whatever. But if you were eating that every day, Robert, it's not good. It's not healthy, and so that's part of the challenge that Mississippi has.
Certainly is, and these places, they're going through the Delta in particular is going through a hard time just because of the lack of industry there and kind of mechanization and of agriculture. But there's people hanging on there, and if you go in there and give them a chance, you're going to have a great time. You're going to have a good time in the Delta, and you're going to eat well, and you're going to meet some cool people. There's
no doubt. We'll post a few photos from you. You send some stuff over that you're proud of, and maybe 5 to 10 photos, and I'll post them at our website so that people can see what you are involved in. But listen, it's been great to catch up with you, Robert.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for staying in touch with me. I really appreciate it. Listen, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.